Remember how in the Altered Beast episode I said there were far better Sega Genesis beat 'em up games? Well, yeah, this is one of them. Stay tuned. Welcome to 30 for 30. I'm your host, Aiden of Blue Couch Productions, and on this show I'm attempting to review 30 games in 30 days. For more on the show's concept, be sure to watch the Altered Beast and Alex Kid episode before this one. Don't worry though, I'll be here when you get back. But yeah, here we are, episode 3 of the show, and today we're going to be reviewing one of my favorite Sega Genesis games of all time. It's Golden Axe, and yeah, I actually have the case for this one, so I figured I'd go ahead and show it off. So before we get into the development and the game review side of things, let's actually just take a look at this case for a second, because when else am I going to have an opportunity to talk about this thing? Just look at how 90s this is. We got the case kind of coming out into the foreground. We got that big old tall font, the Sega Classics written on it. We got that blue in there, the official Sega logo. You can see I paid $10 for this, which is probably too much, but hey, I love the game. And as we go on to the back, we got a little bit of white, a couple of screenshots from the 90s and stuff, and then we have Golden Axe on the side. Taking a look at the cartridge, however, and yeah, we're kind of getting more of that epic style nature. We got Fabio in the front with an axe, and Tyrus with their sword, and Gilly is out here with an axe, and some dragon, I think, in the background. I don't know. Anyway, I like the way these things look, and I figured I'd go ahead and show it. I'll also be sure to get more B-roll, that way you can see them up close as I'm talking about them. But yeah, thank you for indulging me on that. That was a whole lot of fun. Let's actually start now by talking about the development history of Golden Axe. Remember Makoto Uchida, the guy responsible for the arcade version of Altered Beast? Well, it turns out he actually worked on the arcade version of Golden Axe as well. And man, what a glow up. Altered Beast may have been a first week attempt, but Golden Axe is a refined masterpiece with a ton more content and ideas. Uchida cites that his main inspiration for the game was the Conan the Barbarian films, and while I hadn't seen them before making this video, I did do a little bit of research, and apparently it's a kind of medieval film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, which, hey, it looks pretty interesting. Other inspirations include the world building from Dragon Quest, the multiple button combinations of the first Street Fighter of all things, and being in competition with Double Dragon. You see, Double Dragon was the big beat 'em up at the time, and Sega was trying to outdo that, and so Uchida's philosophy behind it was to try to not copy Double Dragon and make something totally unique, and in that aspect, I think he succeeded. The game was released in arcades in the year 1989 and was a huge hit. So yeah, not a bad glow up for Uchida. Even though I didn't like Altered Beast, I definitely saw the potential in it, and it feels like the potential is finally being realized in Golden Axe. But I said all these nice things. Has the game actually held up? I know it was a childhood favorite of mine, but who knows? It might actually be bad nowadays. Let's go ahead and review the game after these messages. Hi, Aiden of Blue Couch Productions here, and I'm sure you're wondering, Aiden, why are you being hugged by a giant stuffed moose and a giant stuffed sloth? And really, the answer is simple. Sometimes I like to get personal. You know what else is pretty personal? Aiden on Anchor, the sponsor for today's episode. Do you like touching, deep, heartfelt discussions in 30 minutes? Oh boy, I sure do. And Aiden on Anchor is full of that. Get behind the scenes knowledge to how I make YouTube videos, my mental health, and even fun thoughts on the latest movies. Spoilers, Justice League's pretty bad. Thankfully, Aiden on Anchor is still as epic as ever. Aiden on Anchor. You can find it on Anchor or any of the other podcast platforms. Like Spotify, the Google one, Apple Who Gives a Shit, and many more. So, go check out the podcast, again, link in the description below, show called Aiden on Anchor. New episodes every Monday. Now back to your regularly scheduled 30 for 30. Bye-bye now. Bye. See you later. Bye-bye. I'm going away. Never coming back. I'm gonna live in the sloth forever. Welcome back to 30 for 30. In the first half, we talked about Uchida's massive glow up from Altered Beast to Golden Axe, and now in the second half, I want to actually review the game and see if it's held up. Golden Axe takes place in the medieval world of Uria, but Uria is in danger, as has been taken over by the evil tyrant, Death Adder. Get it? Because he adds to the deaths. Look, I was a dumb 4-year-old, so I didn't really understand what the name was. It wasn't until years later where I was like, oh my god, they actually did that? That's crazy, bro. Speaking of crazy, Death Adder not only has taken control of the kingdom, he's also kidnapped the king and princess. So it's up to our 3 vagabond heroes to put a stop to Death Adder, save the world, and rescue the king and princess. What makes this setup far more engaging than what I just described to you right there is that there actually is a bit of motivation to our characters here. Yes, they want to save the world and stop Death Adder, but there's also a little bit of revenge thrown in there. Each of the main characters had a loved one that was killed by Death Adder, so now the quest feels a lot more personal in nature. It's what makes the story feel more alive than a lot of games of an earlier ilk. Let's talk presentation for a little bit. Graphically, it's definitely going for a more realistic style, kind of like Altered Beast, and while it hasn't held up as well as, let's say, cartoony games like Alex Kidd, I do like the aesthetic, and you can definitely feel that Conan-like inspiration creeping up in there. The characters are big and pretty well defined, and the world of Uria itself is fantastic. I just need to gush about this world for a second, because I really feel like they went out of their way to make it as detailed as possible. There's multiple points where you're going through the stages, and they actually manage to subvert your expectations. You think you're going through a random village, and oh, it turns out you've been on the back of a turtle this entire time. Or another stage, you're going through a mountain underpass and you see some rocks, but it turns out, no, you've been on the back of an eagle, and those rocks were actually little eagle leaves flying by. And the thing about this that's so cool is that they actually hint to that in the previous levels. There's a little sign that says Turtle Village, and if you pay attention to the layout, you can actually see the eagle's body and stuff. So all of it's totally possible to notice just if you're paying attention to the detail they put in the game. Another little attention to detail moment that I absolutely love is that in between each stage, there's a big map, and it tells you all the things that are happening in your quest, and a little hand will actually draw out the path and the eagle and out all the way as you go through it, and this little epic fantasy jingle plays in the background, and man, like, I just love this setup. The soundtrack is also really good, let me tell you. The past 2 soundtracks have been fine to relatively mediocre, but here it's absolutely epic. It gets your blood pumping, you're ready to fight, and toward the later stages, that ominous sounding theme that builds into a resounding victory as you fight Death Adder and Deathbringer is really cool. The presentation is gorgeous, the world is wonderful, I love our characters and motivations, but all of that would be for naught if the gameplay wasn't good, and unfortunately, it's fantastic. Ha, I got you on that one, didn't I? Maybe it's the past 2 games that kind of got me accustomed to sort of mediocre adventures, but Golden Axe pulls out all the stops. It's a beat 'em up that has a ton of content, including an arcade mode, which is the main story, a duel mode, which basically involves you going through round after round of different enemies with one long life bar and a timer. It can be really fun, especially if you've already beaten the main game. And you also have a beginner mode as well, which tests your skills. That way you can try out all the different characters before you get into the game. But we'll be mainly focusing on the arcade mode since that's the main story and that's what a lot of people will play. The world itself is pretty good, but so is the level design as well. There's multiple points where Golden Axe actually takes advantage of its environment, and if you pay attention to it, you can end up doing better at the game. There's this one part where there's a rocky cliff and a lower path, and you have to pick which one you want to go on before the next screen pops up. If you pick the rocky cliff, there's an extra magic pot that you can get, or if you go on the lower path, you miss out on the magic pot. So you got to be able to know and really decide early on which one you're going to go to. There's also multiple points where there are holes on the ground, and if you fall into the hole, you die. But what you end up figuring out is that you can also knock enemies and bosses into those holes, and they'll die as well. So now it becomes a game of movement, positioning yourself in the right way, and hitting with the prime jump attack to knock a boss off into a pit and kill them immediately, rather than having to go through a long, drawn-out fight. You have 3 hits, pretty much for each life, and in between each stage you can get some meat to heal up a little bit of your life, which is also really cool. There's magic pots in the game, and if you collect enough of them, you can fire off a magic attack. Each of the characters have different magic moves, and they're all based off a particular element. So we have a thunder one, a rock one, and a fire one. And you know what? I've kind of scurried around the bush. I've kind of went all over the place. Let's actually talk about those characters and give them their actual names, wouldn't you say? So up first, we have the mighty Axe Battler, who is a big macho man carrying his sword? Your name's Axe Battler. Why are you carrying a sword? Like presumably your parents named you Axe Battler. Great name, by the way. With the assumption that you would actually go into battle with an axe, but now you're just using a sword, man. Like, that's just disappointing, man. It's disappointing. Get out of here, Axe Battler. I don't want to talk about you no more. Let's talk about the next character, Tyrus Flare. She's the girl of the group, and her main method of attack is magic. Yeah, she has a sword, but her fire-based spells are what she's good at, and she can even summon a dragon if you collect enough of those magic pots. The last character, my favorite, saving the best for last, is Gilius Thunderhead, and he's a dwarf, and I love dwarfs. If you had to ask me why, I'd probably say the Lord of the Rings movies are a pretty big influence on me. Gimli was my favorite character, and now I pretty much just get to play as Gimli with a huge beard and a huge axe and a Viking helmet and everything like that. These characters are really unique from each other, and it actually helps that their movesets are different. Gilius, for example, has a charge attack where he butts his head into people, and a jump attack, whereas Tyrus has a kick, a jump kick that has a lot of priority and speed. Each character also has strengths and weaknesses that make them better or worse at certain things. Tyrus, for example, is a great magic user, but she has the weakest amount of strength. Gilius is great at strength and range, but his magic sucks. It's Axe Battler, actually, who ends up being the average kind of everyday character with pretty average stats around the board, with his range maybe being slightly better than the rest. In fact, it's actually recommended that if you are playing in two-player mode, to pick different characters, that way you get different strengths and weaknesses. Although, do be warned, it's the type of two-player where you can hit your friend, so get ready for a lot of rage if that ends up happening. But the characters are really cool, and they add a little bit of replay value in the fact that once you beat the game, you want to go ahead and try out the other characters to see how much of a different experience it ends up being. There's just a lot of risk versus reward elements. You're exploring the stage, picking out how to best approach things, learning when to save your magic, learning strategies for different boss fights as a whole, and rocking out to really good music and great presentation. When I'm not playing the arcade mode, dual mode is a fun distraction, and the tutorial is fun to beat in 10 minutes or so. But overall, Golden Axe just has a charm about it and gameplay that feels satisfying. There's no technical issues here, none of that clunky stuff that got in the way, just really well-made game with very few programming errors at all. So Golden Axe, my final rating for it is a perfect 5 out of 5 stars. Uchida has redeemed himself with a beat 'em up that can stand the test of time. So yeah, that's my first perfect rating in the show. Will other games be able to get a 5-star rating, or will they falter by the wayside? I guess you'll have to wait and find out. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe. And hey, tune in tomorrow for a brand new episode of 30 for 30. I've been Aiden of Blue Couch Productions, and I'm signing off. Bye-bye.